Have you ever felt like your life never really belonged to you? Like you were just living out someone else's plans, walking down a path laid out before you were even old enough to know your own name? That's how it was for me for a long time. My name is Ellie, and I'm 70 years old now. I live in a small white house at the edge of a quiet road in Kentucky, where the porch creaks and the dogwoods bloom every spring. Most days I sit out here with a glass of sweet tea and watch the light change across the fields, wondering how I ever made it this far. The story I'm about to tell you isn't some pretty thing wrapped in a bow. It's not a fairy tale, and it's not something I used to talk about. But time does strange things to silence, and some truths demand to be spoken before the last pages turn. So if you're listening, if something in you needs to hear it, then maybe this is your story too, in a way. I grew up in a pocket of the Appalachians, where the roads turned to mud in spring and dust in summer. Our house was a leaning, wood-framed thing with more gaps than walls and a roof that only half kept the rain out. We had chickens in the yard, wood stacked by the stove, and more kids than bedrooms, but we made do the way folks like us always had. I didn't have dolls or store-bought toys. What I had were books from the traveling library that came once a month in a dented van, and those books were a treasure. I'd hide under the porch or climb the sycamore behind our shed, reading until the pages blurred with sunset, dreaming of places I'd never seen and people I might someday become. Most evenings after the chores were done and Mama's voice stopped echoing through the yard, I'd sneak up the ridge near our land. From the top, I could see the town's one blinking stoplight and the winding two-lane where the Greyhound bus rolled by twice a week. That bus fascinated me. It was silver and long and moved like it belonged to a different world. Sometimes I'd pretend I was on it heading to a city where nobody knew my name, where I could walk into a shop or a school and be seen for who I might be, not just another poor girl from a broken home. I didn't know the names of those cities, but I imagined them smelling like new paper and warm bread full of people with kind eyes and clean shoes. We were dirt poor, but I didn't know to be ashamed of it then. We grew what we ate and patched our clothes until the fabric gave up, and that was just life. But deep down, I always felt like my life was meant to stretch wider than our fence line, like there was something waiting past those hills, if I could just get to it. I was 15 the summer my father sold me. The heat clung to everything like syrup, thick and stifling, and I remember the smell of biscuit dough on my hands when he called me into the front room. His voice had that edge that made even my brothers freeze mid-step. But I didn't know that day would split my life clean in two. Mama wouldn't meet my eyes when I walked past her. She just kept kneading dough like her hands were the only thing keeping her upright. My father sat in his chair, the one no one else was allowed to use, rolling a cigarette between his fingers, like he was waiting for the right moment to strike. He didn't waste time. Said I was old enough. Said a deal had been made, and I was to be married the next morning to Mr. Ronald Glass, the man who owned the lumber yard just past the Mill Creek. He was 48, a widower with grown sons, and the thought of him made my stomach twist in ways I didn't yet understand, but knew were wrong. I told my father no. I said it out loud, trembling, but I said it. He slapped the word right out of my mouth. Told me girls like me don't get choices, that debts were debts, and I should be grateful I'd landed a man with land and steady income. Mama still didn't say a word, just stood in the doorway holding her apron, her eyes on the floor. That silence from her hurt more than the slap. It said everything, that there would be no rescue, no second chance, no one standing between me and that man's front door. The next morning, she dressed me in my only decent dress, brushed my hair with hands that shook, whispered to be strong, though her voice cracked like dry wood. Then we stood on the porch as a black car rolled down the dirt road, raising dust behind it like a ghost. He stepped out like he was buying livestock, looked me over with that same flat appraisal you'd give a mule at auction. My father nudged me forward, hand firm on my back, and I knew right then that my childhood was over. Whatever dreams I'd had on that hilltop, watching the Greyhound vanish down the road, they were gone, burned up in the heat and the silence and the weight of a signature made without my name. The house was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. White columns like bones stretching up toward a sky that didn't feel like mine anymore. Inside, it smelled like lemon polish and secrets, and every room had too many corners where silence seemed to settle. I was shown to a bedroom larger than our whole house back home, with velvet curtains and a bed so soft it felt like a trap. Nothing in that mansion was mine. The clothes laid out for me weren't chosen by me. The meals served weren't made for my taste, and every word I spoke was watched like it might be ammunition. I wasn't allowed to cook, to clean, or to do anything that made me feel useful. And somehow, that was worse than being worked to the bone. Mr. Glass didn't speak much unless it was to give instructions, or to remind me that my duty was to still be quiet and be pretty when he had guests. The staff looked at me like I didn't belong, and maybe I didn't. I was too young, too unsure, and too broken to pretend like silk and chandeliers made any of this right. I wasn't allowed to leave the property. If I needed anything, I had to ask through his housekeeper, who passed on every word I said. Letters were read before they were sent, phone calls monitored, and when I once tried to step outside without permission, the front gate was locked. The worst part wasn't the rules. It was the feeling that I had disappeared. That Ellie girl who loved books and dreamed of cities had been swallowed by this house and replaced with someone who just floated from room to room, unseen and unspoken. It was a gilded cage, yes, but it was still a cage. And every day it got a little harder to remember what freedom had ever felt like. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just sat on the edge of that cold, high bed, my hands on my stomach, trying to feel something that wasn't confusion or dread. It wasn't that I didn't want the baby. It was that I didn't know what kind of life I could give it. I was 17, trapped, and carrying the child of a man who looked at me like I was part of the furniture. The days blurred. I felt sick all the time, not just from the pregnancy, but from the pressure, the loneliness, the weight of living in a house where I couldn't be myself, even for a minute. Mr. Glass didn't ask how I felt. He only said it was time I earned my keep, like this baby was a receipt. One night after a dinner where I said something he didn't like, and he slammed a glass so hard it shattered, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until I couldn't breathe. That's when the cramps started. By morning, the bleeding wouldn't stop. I lost the baby before I even had a chance to feel it kick. The doctor came and left with cold words and no comfort. Mr. Glass didn't speak to me for 3 days, like my body had betrayed him on purpose. But in the silence that followed, something shifted. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just sad. I was angry. That child had been the only thing I had, the only piece of me that might have belonged just to me. And when it was gone, I knew if I didn't leave soon, I'd lose whatever was left of myself, too. The first time I whispered the word escape out loud, it didn't sound real. It was late, and the house was sleeping, and Martha was standing in the pantry pretending to look for flour. She didn't look at me, just nodded once, and said her brother could drive at night if he had to. From that moment on, everything changed. I moved slower, quieter, always watching, always listening. I counted the days until Mr. Glass's business trip, rehearsing every step in my head like a script I couldn't afford to forget. Martha gave me a small canvas bag, old and stained but strong. I packed only what I needed: 2 sets of clothes, a picture of my mama when she was young, and a few crumpled bills I had managed to hide over the months. I wrapped it all in a towel and kept it under the sink behind the cleaning rags. The day he left, I didn't cry. I didn't breathe too deeply, either afraid it might wake something bad. He said he'd be back in 3 days, and when the door slammed shut behind him, I started the countdown in my mind. That night, the rain came early. Thick, steady, perfect. I waited until every light in the house was out and the silence settled into the walls. Then I moved. Slowly, barefoot, heart pounding so loud, I swore someone would hear it echo through the floors. The stairs creaked like traitors, each one a test. I stepped sideways to the edges where the wood was stronger, pressing my hand to the wall to steady myself. Every shadow felt like it might breathe. When I reached the kitchen, Martha was already there, eyes red but steady. She handed me a small thermos and whispered that her brother was parked down the road, past the tree-line lights, off engine waiting. I squeezed her hand so hard it hurt, then slipped through the back door. The wind slapped my face the moment I stepped outside. The rain soaked me instantly, blurring my vision, but I kept moving. I ran across the lawn through the hedges and out into the woods without looking back. Branches scratched at my arms. My dress caught on a root and tore. Somewhere behind me, a dog barked, and I froze. But it didn't grow louder. No lights turned on. No voices shouted. Then I saw the truck. Headlights off engine, humming like a heartbeat, and a man with Martha's eyes behind the wheel. He opened the passenger door, and I climbed in without a word. As we pulled away, I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. But something inside me unclenched. For the first time in years, I was moving under my own power, and that alone felt like a victory. The ride to Nashville took just under 4 hours, but it felt like stepping through a lifetime. I stared out the window the whole way, soaked clothes sticking to my skin, hands clutched around the bag in my lap like it might vanish if I let go. The truck's heater barely worked, but I didn't complain. I was too scared that if I opened my mouth, I'd beg to go back, and I couldn't afford to want safety more than freedom. When we reached the bus station, I didn't know what to do. People rushed past with suitcases and newspapers, voices loud and sharp, and the smell of fried food and engine grease filled the air. I stood near the wall, shrinking in on myself, hungry but too overwhelmed to move. Martha's brother gave me $20 and a wrinkled map, then drove off with a nod. Just like that, I was alone. No plan. No place to sleep. No idea how to survive. But I was free, and that word kept echoing through my mind like a prayer I didn't know how to say right. I found a public restroom and changed into dry clothes. Washed my face in the sink until the woman next to me gave me a funny look. Then I wandered until I saw a glass building with a sign that said Nashville Bell Telephone Company. It looked clean and calm, and nothing like the life I'd just run from. I walked in heart-hammering and asked if they were hiring. The woman at the front desk barely looked up when she handed me a form. I tried to fill it out, hands shaking, but when I got to the social security number and ID, my pen froze. I didn't have either. I whispered that I'd left them behind, and the woman frowned. She slid the paper back and said they needed documentation. That was policy. That was life. But as I turned to leave, she called me back. Her name was Dolores. She had grey hair pinned in curls and eyes that had seen enough to know desperation when it walked through her door. She didn't ask questions. She just looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Maybe I could help around the office. Filing, cleaning, whatever was needed. Nothing official, not yet, but something." That night, I slept on a bench behind the station, wrapped in my coat, watching the sky bruise into morning. I was cold, hungry, and terrified. But for the first time, I had a name I could say without flinching. I had a small job, a crack in the wall, a way in. And that was enough to believe tomorrow might be different from yesterday. I found a room above a bakery, just big enough for a bed, a chair, and a window that let in the smell of cinnamon every morning. The walls were thin, and the stairs creaked, but it was mine. I paid weekly cash only, and the landlady didn't ask questions. Dolores kept her word. Within a month, she had me on payroll as a filing clerk. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the rhythm of it in papers out drawers that opened and closed with a soft click that made me feel like I was doing something that mattered. Nights were harder. I missed home, though I wasn't sure what part of it I actually missed. Maybe just the version of myself I used to be before everything got stolen. I started classes at the Adult Learning Center down the street. GED prep math that made my head spin essays that forced me to dig into parts of my brain I hadn't touched since I was a child. It felt good to struggle, to push through things on my own. Every correct answer, every past quiz felt like a small rebellion against the version of me they tried to create. One afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found a letter from my older brother. I hadn't heard from him in years. He wrote that our father had died in his sleep. The old man never spoke my name again after I left. That Mr. Glass had finally signed annulment papers not out of kindness, but because he had remarried. I folded the letter and set it on the table next to my coffee. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief or grief. Just quiet. A kind of peace I hadn't known existed. For the first time, no one had a claim on me. No one could send a car to drag me back. I wasn't someone's wife, someone's debt, someone's property. I was just Ellie. And I was finally becoming the version of her I used to dream about back when I watched the greyhound disappear down the road from the hill. Life didn't change all at once. It happened slowly, like a tree growing its roots deeper each season. I kept working, kept learning. And one day, I looked up and realized I had built something real. Richard walked into my life on a Tuesday, polite and a little shy, asking if I could help him set up his business line. He had kind eyes and a voice that made me feel calm without trying. He didn't ask about my past. He just saw me for who I was that day, and somehow that was enough. We dated slowly. I told him the truth piece by piece, and he never flinched. When we got married, it was just the two of us and a judge at City Hall. No fancy dress, no guests, just quiet vows and hands held tight. A year later, our daughter was born. We named her Lila after the wildflowers that grew behind our house. We lived in a little place on the edge of town with a garden out back and laundry that always smelled like sunshine. Richard worked in construction. I kept moving up at the phone company until they made me a supervisor. It felt strange at first having people look to me for answers, but I took it seriously. I wanted Lila to see what it meant to stand on your own feet. I told her stories about growing up with nothing and how strength isn't loud. It's quiet and steady and shows up when no one's watching. I never wanted her to feel like she had to be saved. I wanted her to know she was enough, just as she was. Some nights, I'd sit on the porch after she went to bed, watching fireflies blink in the dark, thinking about all the versions of me that didn't make it. And I'd whisper thank you to the girl who ran barefoot through the woods, to the woman who didn't give up when everything said she should. Because this life, this little quiet, beautiful life, I built it, and no one can ever take it from me. I sit here most mornings now on this porch that faces the same hills I used to dream past as a child. The sky over Kentucky changes with the season, but the quiet is always the same. It gives me time to think about how far I've come, and the road that still stretches out for others like me. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who's been told her voice doesn't matter, who's been made to feel small or traded away like she had no say. Maybe you've lived parts of it. Maybe you're still in the middle of your own chapter, waiting for a door to open or a window to crack just wide enough to slip through. If my story speaks to you, let it be more than just a memory. Share yours. Pass it on. Because sometimes hearing someone else survive is the first step to believing you can too. And I'll ask you this just like I've asked myself 1,000 times. What dream did you have to give up? And is it time to take it back?